Slow News Day. I'm Steve Poikinen.
And I'm Sarah Hall.
We are here highlighting artists, activists, organizers, and agitators pushing back against late-stage capitalism here in the heart of the empire. Joining us tonight is our friend, a man who has been through hell and back more than once. You know him as the man who brought to light just how corrupt Broward County has become in the 21st century. He battled Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. He battled Brenda Snipes. He battled the DNC. He battled Debbie Wasserman-Schultz's brother. He is Tim Canova. He is currently teaching law at Nova Southeastern University in Florida. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Slow News Day. Tim, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Man, what happened to you in 2018 felt personal. it did. I'm not gonna lie. It's good to get a chance to talk to you, and we're all moving forward in some new directions. One more time. I'm sorry, it kind of cut out there.
No, I was saying it was pretty revealing, I thought.
You know, I watched, I think it was the morning that Nico House put the video up of the unmarked boxes full of ballots being carried into an Enterprise rental truck and just unescorted, you know, no one to verify where the ballots being found in storage closets, and just, I mean, a poorly written episode of House of Cards would play out like that, right?
Who needs chain of custody on paper ballots when you're rigging the voting machines, when you're rigging the software of the electronic voting machines? Chain of custody of paper ballots is just so antiquated.
It's amazing to me that more people didn't pick up on this. I think there's a direct line between people who expose and who can bring to light election fraud in this country, election rigging in this country, and then people like Julian Assange who expose deeper and wider crimes that happen, you know, internationally, both in the name of the United States and other countries. And do you feel like, I mean, because I know you went on Fox once or twice, but that was I don't know if that was the extent of it outside of Lefty Media and Jimmy Dore and you know, Tim Black and Nico and those guys.
Well, that is true. The difference between my run in 2016 and 2018 is that by 2018, I had basically been blacklisted from the mainstream liberal media. You know, MSNBC and CNN and all of them weren't going to touch me by the 2018 campaign. And I was on Fox a number of times throughout 2017 and into early 2018. The turning point there was when we won our ballot destruction case against Brenda Snipes. You know, we believed that the results of 2016 were real fishy. Our internal numbers, we were knocking on more than 10,000 doors a week, and our internal numbers showed us beating Wasserman-Schultz. So when we lost by 13 percentage points, it seemed like bullshit to me. And it took a while for experts to start sending in their, you know, rather detailed analysis. So we put in requests for the ballots. We had to sue. While the suit was pending, Brenda Snipes destroyed all the ballots. These are felonies.
Yeah.
And in May of 2018, we won on summary judgment in the Florida Circuit Court. They ruled that Snipes had violated federal and state law. We were granted summary judgment. There was no relief because the ballots were already gone. What could they do? It was just, you know, we'd get attorney's fees, and that was it. And I was hoping when we won that case that the floodgates would open and that, you know, there'd be criminal investigations and prosecutions. And
Yeah.
instead, no, the blacklist just got even tougher on me. I was no longer even welcome on Fox News.
That's a cold morning, man.
Yeah,
That is a cold
absolutely.
morning.
And it only changed when the 2018 election actually occurred, and you saw kind of this double train wreck in Broward County because the race for governor and the race for U.S. senator were all being decided by recounts in Broward County. That suddenly Fox News woke up to the reality of Brenda Snipes, and then I was on Fox News something like 3 days in a row. But once those races were pretty much decided, and it was the Republican candidates for governor and senator who won, nobody really wanted to talk about Brenda Snipes anymore. Nobody certainly wanted to talk about our rigged election either. It's, you know, Chris Hedges said a while ago that the corruption is so bad now that they don't even try to hide it.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, I think if you take a look at what happened in Florida's 23rd district in our race in both 2016 and 2018, it confirms with what Chris Hedges was saying. You know, the rigging happens with impunity here.
Yeah, I mean, we've used that same Chris Hedges quote on this show more than once, and it's so blatant, it's so obvious, and at the same time, it highlights just how necessary it highlights how necessary the propaganda is in corporate media, because that is what is continually dividing us. If it wasn't about red team and blue team, more people would realize, holy shit, we don't have free and fair elections in this country right now. And I have examples I can point to, not just in Broward County, but in multiple places all over the country. The way that polling places have been limited, the way that you can't go and cast your ballot in your neighborhood anymore, the way that people get just purged from voter rolls or affiliation switched, or, you know, there's multiple ways that they do this. And Greg Palast has been beating the drum about it for years, and they barely let him on TV anymore.
Yeah, yep. I know. It's a shame. I think you're right to call out the corporate media as being one of the real linchpins to the whole system. You know, people hear an election result on TV or read about it in their newspapers. They just assume, well, that's reality. Mm-hmm. When it might be nowhere near reality.
It's the opposite of reality. just guess whatever's the opposite, and you're going to be closer to the truth.
I keep saying that we live in a fucking cartoon. And it's, I mean, we had a president who won a Nobel Peace Prize and then went on to start 5 more illegal wars. And then this president is in the WWE Hall of fucking Fame. And, like, you who ran on election integrity were just brutally savaged by fraud and election rigging in broad daylight, like Hedges says, like you said, like Jimmy Dore says, you know, and people are somehow mad at, like, Greg Palast for talking about it, or Governor Rick Scott, but not mad enough to really do anything about it, not mad enough to get in the street about it. And I don't know how the red tide thing, I haven't checked lately, but I don't know how Florida's ecosystem is right now, but it seems like Extinction Rebellion has a point, and it seems like Florida would be just as good a place as any to get going on that.
Yeah, last year, right now the red tide seems to have quieted down for the past month. I haven't heard of major kills anywhere. Early in the year, right around Fort Myers, there was another sort of mass killing of fish that I read about in the papers. Well, I shouldn't even say I read about it in the papers. It wasn't much in the papers. It was more on social media. Right. You know, and this is what we did also last year. The red tide and the blue-green algae kind of hit at the same time. The Gulf Stream brought the red tide around to our side of Florida, the East Coast. And I was live streaming from the beach right here in Hollywood, showing hundreds of dead fish in the morning. But good luck reading about it in the newspapers or seeing it on TV. They really don't want to cover any of that. Florida does seem to be ground zero for a lot of things. You know, the environmental challenges and catastrophes. and certainly the kind of election rigging and political corruption. Broward County seems to be ground zero for that.
Even without Brenda Sipes, it was Broward County that was called into question in the 2000 presidential election. Like, it's historically
Yeah.
where, and again, just no consequences. There's nobody really has to pay a price for rigging an election or hitting the gas pedal on destroying the environment, or
Right.
I mean, it's and that's nationwide. I mean,
Right. Last year, the mainstream press tried to hang around my neck that I'm a conspiracy theorist because I was asking questions about things like rigged elections.
Yeah.
And of course, the mainstream has spent 2 years, going on 2.5 years now, chasing Russian conspiracies. In fact, McClatchy's had written a piece. They focused on a tweet that I had sent, that I had posted in October of 2016. The tweet was praising the Miami-Dade County Commission for a unanimous resolution to ban fracking. And somehow they say it got retweeted by some Russian bot or purported Russian bot, and
that's all they have
for
to
that
do
reason.
now.
Yeah, I'm helping Vladimir Putin's energy policies by opposing fracking. Well, we have a new Republican governor here who opposes fracking, or at least so he said. I wonder, are they going to call him a conspiracy theorist or a Vladimir Putin puppet? So they're the ones who are going off on these ridiculous conspiracies to distract attention. And what gets me is you get presidents like former President Barack Obama, who used to love to talk about American exceptionalism and the rule of law and how sacrosanct it is here in the United States. Where's the rule of law when, a county election supervisor can destroy every paper ballot cast? It violates federal and state criminal statutes, and there's not even a criminal investigation.
Well, it highlights that we have a tiered justice system. We have a very different way of approaching crime, and it's a K Bono situation. Oh my God, like, who benefits? Right? And if the powers, if the people who are interested in perpetuating the status quo or perpetuating a two-party system where it's one hand washing the other as opposed to ideological opposites trying to come together in a reasonable way that represents the people, they're going to look the other way. They're going to err on the side of fuck the guy bringing this to light because we have a thing that we want to keep going. It's in itself a criminal enterprise.
It's true. It really does look like organized crime. We were frustrated that there was no criminal investigation. And part of the reason I was hoping and counting on a criminal investigation was that the Republicans are in power in Tallahassee and in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. It's a Republican Justice Department, presumably, in Washington. It's the Republican Attorney General in Tallahassee. And we thought the Republicans would have every incentive to investigate Democratic corruption in Broward County, especially corruption associated with Debbie Wasserman-Schultz.
Oh, yeah.
But that's, I was proven incorrect in that naive assumption because the two parties really wash each other's dirty laundry, and they've got the same corporate interests, and none of these big corporate interests wanted an election scandal here, especially one that would suggest that the rigging is being done through manipulation of the software of the electronic voting machine.
Right.
Because both parties benefit from those kinds of manipulations. In some jurisdictions, I imagine the Republicans control the machines, and others the Democrats do.
Yeah, I don't hesitate to agree with that. We had a guy on the show, Carlos, who he's a TV and film writer in LA, and the office that he worked out of was contracted by the DNC. He was at a desk writing slightly different vice presidential acceptance speeches for 4 different people like a month before the convention. Um, it's I mean, because we have flat out, conspiracy podcast hosts that have been guests on this show, who have a much different take. But you would think that anyone could agree that getting Debbie Wasserman-Schultz out of power would be a grand idea, like as fast as possible. As far as I know, nobody really likes her except for payday lenders, the military industrial complex, the securities and financial institutions. Am I missing a couple of people on that?
Big sugar, private prisons. Right. There's no shortage of corporate interests that back her. And, I've come to realize that the Republicans are happy with her in office because she's a wonderful punching bag. And they would be, let me say, those corporate interests that back Wasserman-Schultz also back a lot of Republicans, and they'd much rather keep Debbie there in office than have somebody like me who isn't raising a penny from any of those corporate interests.
Right.
So it really isn't Republican versus Democrat or liberal versus conservative. It's insiders versus outsiders, and it's right versus wrong.
So
versus integrity.
On that, what is your take on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Because to me, she is sheepdogging people into a party that is inherently opposed to workers, poor people, people of color, people who are struggling.
I got behind Alexandria relatively early, before she made that big surge at the end. And she was grateful. She contacted me to say how grateful she was for my endorsement and, contribution to her campaign. But once she won, let's just say she didn't return the favor. Now, I understand that it must be very imposing for fellow progressives to come out publicly against Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. As far as, how she is done in office, I think when I look at her and I look at Bernie also, and a lot of other progressives, I'm disappointed in their priorities. I think the top priority should be to expose the election frauds. The Democrats are never going to have majority support for a Green New Deal or Medicare for all or anything else on their ambitious agenda as long as elections are being rigged. And it doesn't even come up really on Bernie's radar, I think. Bernie has spoken out much more about Vladimir Putin and Russia than he has about the kinds of rigs the DNC was doing in 2016. So it's kind of beside me how he expects to win for 2020 if nothing changes, because I really think the silence normalizes this kind of election rigging. As you mentioned, the mass purging of voters, the superdelegates, the electronic rigging. It's all normalized by the silence.
And here's the thing, and I don't. When I was talking to Elizabeth Voss on the show the other day, and she, was a vocal supporter of Bernie in 2016 and has since, for 100% this reason, his failure to address election rigging and election integrity and make that a focal point of his platform. And I agree with that completely. The reason that I got involved with the Progressive Independent Party and became, you know, a founding member of that organization was exactly because we could see it coming a mile away that this guy was getting robbed, and we wanted to kind of be ready, you know, at some point to be a genuine third political party. You're right. If you're not talking about election integrity as a presidential candidate going into 2020, then you may as well be selling unicorns. You may as well be selling, you know, it.
And yet, if a candidate like Bernie does make election integrity a big issue,
Oh man,
it just will lead to more rigging against him. You know, he'll be blacked out of the media that much quicker by making it a big issue, and that's the catch-22. If he ignores it, nothing changes. If he tries to take it head on, will he just be airbrushed out of the campaign? I think he's too big a personality, and there are too many followers of Bernie to just have him dismissed that easily. I think his silence probably stems from something else. You know, all kinds of threats that were sent his way in the weeks before the 2016 Democratic Convention. So whatever they're holding over him, they're still holding over him.
I agree with that sentiment. There was somebody that said, you know, why didn't he just come out at the convention? What held him back from saying, "Hey, I got robbed. What the fuck?" And as a cynical joke, I was like, "Oh, the phone he just looked at with the live feed of his grandkids with the dot right there on, you know, like that's probably fucking."
It wasn't a golden shower by a Russian prostitute.
Right? No, man, it certainly wasn't. It wasn't Guccifer 2.0. It wasn't fucking. It wasn't Julian Assange. It wasn't fucking
thing.
Susan Sarandon. It wasn't Jimmy Dore. It wasn't Tim Canova. It wasn't me. It wasn't you. The fucking. I don't. I wouldn't put it past the DNC. I wouldn't put it past the Clintons. I wouldn't put it past Debbie Wasserman-Schultz to outright threaten the lives of anyone that they felt was.
Well, you know, it's interesting. When I announced that I was running again, it was in June of 2017, and at that point, I announced I was running as a Democrat. I had the feeling it was going to play out the way it ended up playing out, but I wanted to give the Democrats every opportunity to join me in calling for an investigation of the destroyed ballots. Well, they were not actually destroyed yet, as far as we knew, but we were trying to inspect them. And I was kind of ambushed by the press at that announcement. They brought up a couple of statements I had made about, well, the gentleman who died violently in the weeks before the Democratic Convention, whose name is never to be repeated. His name is now 2 4-letter words, unfortunately. And, you know, I was pretty much asked by the press to absolve Wasserman-Schultz and the DNC of any wrongdoing in this young man's murder.
Wow.
Now, there's been no criminal investigation that I've heard of, and yet I'm to be absolving people of crimes. And I just said, I said, honestly, I don't know what they're capable of. And I don't. And in the year and a half since then, as the destroyed ballots came out, as the rigging of this last election came out, anyone who would lie, steal, and cheat for elections, I don't know what they're capable of. I really don't.
I do think that people should be able to say Seth Rich's name out loud without somebody's head exploding.
I agree, and you know there was so much of a backlash for asking questions about Seth Rich's murder. You know, where suddenly it was a former DNC spokesman who was then the spokesperson for Seth's parents, and out of respect for the parents, you're not supposed to say his name, and you know, it just shows the kind of suppression that goes on. I mean, instead of an open, transparent criminal investigation, we're not even allowed to say the young man's name.
And Donna Brazil did once.
Right. Well, the establishment is allowed to. It's others who cannot even ask the question.
Yeah, it's insane. I don't know if you saw it or not, but Joe Rogan set Jimmy Dore straight on that when he was on. He was like, no, it's okay to ask questions because it turns out that it was suspicious as fuck, and like you're allowed to say why was this just shut down, you know, that clearly there's more to the story than what the story was presented, and you know, the fact that you're not allowed to ask questions about it says much more than
I imagine if you're asking if the Russians killed Seth, then that maybe is okay.
Oh man, Susan Sarandon has a hit team too. You know she does, man. You know she does. It's fucking. Let's see. I wanted to talk about the petition again a little bit more. I need to put that up on the screen.
Sure. The candidates with a contract started a citizens petition last week, and the petition deals with the 2018 election in Florida's 23rd. So let me just back up and say in the final weeks of the campaign, it certainly felt like we were surging everywhere as people became, their attention started to focus on the election. There was a Republican news outlet that published a report of a Republican poll. I never saw the poll, but the news outlet reported that there was a Republican poll that had Wasserman-Schultz and me in a dead heat at 34% each, with the Republican candidate back in the teens, which wasn't that surprising to me because the district is somewhere around 40% plus Democrat, 35% independent, and 25% Republican. So we always thought that we would be seen as the main alternative to Wasserman-Schultz, and that Wasserman-Schultz is highly unpopular here. Yeah. It was very telling that Wasserman-Schultz and the Democrats never published a single poll, and they had the money to. I didn't have the money to be polling. Wasserman-Schultz did. She raised a lot of money, outraised me by an awful lot this time. And they never published a poll, which suggested to me they were doing polling, but their polling wasn't giving them good news.
Right.
So when that Republican report came out showing us in a dead heat, it was like the dam broke open. I was getting calls every day from Republicans telling me that Republicans were flocking to me, that in early voting, Republicans were voting for me, and independents, of course, we always thought were going to break our way, and younger folks. And then the election day comes, the polls close, and within an hour of the polls closing, it's reported that Wasserman-Schultz has won. She's suddenly the most popular Democrat in South Florida, outpolling Bill Nelson and Andrew Gillum. And I'm at 5% in the poll, in the polls, 5%. And so we always thought it was bullshit. We really did. In the weeks since then, we started to, I should say, experts, election experts, people with a lot of skills that I don't have, statistical experts. They bear down on the statistics, and they see that I got 5% for every demographic group in the district. It's as if I've been capped at 5%. And
yeah, said, or like you win the lottery every day for however many weeks in a row, literally.
The chair of Georgia Tech's School of Computational Science, somebody with security clearances from intelligence agencies, that's what he said. He said that would be like getting capped at 5% for every demographic group would be as likely as winning the lottery every day for a year. That's his quote, okay? So we started to put together a complaint to file a lawsuit and to file with the U.S. House of Representatives. And that, of course, wasn't the only evidence that we gathered. There were 98,000 votes that for weeks the supervisor wasn't reporting where, when, or how they were cast. We didn't know if they were cast in by absentee ballots or vote by mail, early voting, election day, or provisional ballots. And the experts tell me that's a telltale sign of votes that could have simply been switched from one candidate to another.
Right.
Every electronic scanning machine. So when you take your paper ballot and you fill it out, you hand it over to an election official who then feeds it through the scanning machine. Every one of those scanning machines had wireless cellular modems on them. Very convenient if you want to hack into the system, and apparently all it would take is altering 4 or 5 lines of source code on the software. Well, let's inspect the software. No, you're not allowed to do that. The software is proprietary. It's the private property of the big vending companies, the big software companies that are hired by the supervisor of elections. I should mention that only a week or two before the election, Wasserman-Schultz was publicly campaigning for photographs with Brenda Snipes.
That's right. That's right.
We already mentioned the breakdown in the chain of custody of the paper ballots. So we file, and the bottom line is the House of Representatives seated Wasserman-Schultz in early January. The House, under the Constitution, is the final judge of the elections of its members. That made our complaint in the circuit court in Tallahassee moot. Circuit court dismissed on other procedural grounds. We thought about appealing, but there's no sense appealing since the House is the final judge of the election. So our complaint challenging the election is before the House Administration Committee, which is controlled by Democrats right now. They've done nothing. They've never acknowledged receipt of our complaint. The clerk of the House has not acknowledged receipt of the complaint. And the petition drive by candidates with a contract was started last week. It's gathered several thousand signatures already. And I don't know if 100,000 signatures will make a difference in getting Nancy Pelosi's leadership and the House Administration Committee to do anything. The House Administration Committee was also charged with initial investigation of the Awan IT scandal.
That's right.
You remember that? The Awan brothers were Pakistani brothers who were hired by Wasserman-Schultz. They were making something, each of them, $160,000 a year. That's almost as much as members of Congress make. It's outlandish how high.
Yeah.
And a book just came out by Luke Rosiak called Obstruction of Justice. And Rosiak is a journalist who's on the right side of the spectrum, politically speaking,
right,
on the conservative side. But I don't know any journalist who has followed that story of the Awan IT scandal more diligently than Rosiak. And I've started reading his book. It's a fascinating read about how this scandal gets swept under the rug. So Awan ends up getting arrested for bank fraud, for lying on a bank application for a mortgage loan or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's nothing compared to what the House Inspector General had already found, that the Awan brothers had committed cybersecurity violations. I kid you not that Awan was actually in Pakistan for months, accessing the private emails of something like 24 members of the House of Representatives, including, I think, everyone on the House Intelligence Committee. How this is not a major national security issue is beyond. And I admit, again, my very poor calculation of the political realities of the time we live in. When I made that decision to run independent, I thought it was a stroke of genius, because I thought for sure the Republicans, who still controlled the House of Representatives and the Justice Department, presumably, would blow up this IT scandal in Debbie Wasserman-Schultz's face, and that the Republicans would be running ads against her on this. But instead, they didn't do any of such things. They swept it under the rug, which implies that the Awan ring perhaps has been blackmailing members of Congress. That's a fair implication. And as far as the Republican race for this House seat, in the Republican primary, there was I should say the person who won the primary was the one who spent the least amount of money, was never really seen much out there stumping, and he seems to be the Republican nominee each cycle and gets a bigger campaign war chest each time.
Okay.
So I will tell you this, that the two Republicans who lost that primary, Carlos Reyes, a Republican lawyer, and Carla Spalding, a Navy veteran, both believed that it was quite possible that the machines were rigged against them. And in fact, Reyes wrote an op-ed suggesting that is a real possibility. Everybody here, I should say every losing candidate in Broward County at this point, maybe I shouldn't say every, but quite a lot of the candidates who end up on the losing end, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, or independents, don't have much faith in the election results in Broward County. And
unless you're getting a big fat war chest to show up and be
right.
the Washington Generals every 2 years.
Just quietly and graciously, right?
Yeah. No, there's money in being the Washington Generals. The Democrats have made an art out of that themselves. You know,
the Washington Generals, that was the team that used to lose all the time to the Harlem Globetrotters.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly.
Good one.
I mean, it's I don't know how voting inside of a rigged system in a duopoly in 2020 is going to present an effective avenue for change, given we have 12 years to combat climate change. We've got a government that has announced on like CBS News that they're going to use geoengineering to block out the sun. They're spraying harmless barium, like I look at the problems right here in Florida's 23rd congressional district. You know, for 3 years I was a candidate. I'm very familiar with the problems that ordinary folks have here. And, you know, at just the bread and butter kind of issues, it's really horrifying, I think. The public school systems are falling apart. There's mold and mildew in the classrooms. Teachers and students are getting sick by the hundreds, if not the thousands, all the time from the mold and mildew in the classrooms. There's a housing crisis where people can't even afford to rent. Young people here and nationwide, they say 18 to 34-year-olds are more likely to be living with their parents than to be living on their own or starting families on their own. Yeah, we have close to a full employment economy, but that's because so many people are underemployed. You know, they can't leave the crappy job they have because there's not another good job waiting for them. Healthcare costs keep rising, education costs keep rising. For most people, it feels like incomes are stagnant, costs are rising. It's a treadmill that they're losing ground on all the time. But, you know, if you're in the top few percent of households, these are the best of times ever. Oh, yeah.
And that's the reality here on the ground in the 23rd district. It's the reality in most districts in this country. And you have a political system that's absolutely rigged and keeps out any discussion of these real issues.
You're 100% right on that. We're in Santa Cruz County. According to our own vice mayor, this is the fourth most income unequal place around, like on the planet.
It's Silicon Valley area. You're close to.
We are right outside of it. If you go over Bear Creek Road, you wind up in Campbell and San Jose and Google and Facebook and all that. They're in Mountain View, they're right over the hill from us.
I've heard of software developers out there who are sleeping in their cars.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a thing.
That's no joke. Then average 2-bedroom house here now is $2,800 a month.
Right.
Jobs don't. Local jobs don't pay those wages.
And this is my complaint really. I hate to make complaints against somebody like Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, but
No,
you
go
know,
for it, man.
they've allowed the debate to become one about socialism. And socialism now getting a bad name because of their blueprints for a Green New Deal and things like that.
Hmm.
I was asked several times on Fox TV in 2016. The questions were like along the lines of Bernie Sanders supports you and you support Bernie Sanders and Bernie Sanders is a socialist. So won't you be supporting a socialist agenda if you're elected? And my response was, we've already got socialism in America. Okay, when Donald Trump says this will never be a socialist country, I think the appropriate response isn't we want a Green New Deal or something. It should be we have socialism now. Take a look at the trillions of dollars of support that Wall Street banks got in the aftermath of the biggest financial crisis of our lifetimes, in generations. We're talking about in the first 2 years of that crisis, the Federal Reserve made $29 trillion of low interest loans at 0.25%, not to my law students, not to college students, not to homeowners, but to the big banks and hedge funds, and to foreign banks and foreign central banks. And you look at the trillions of dollars in subsidies that, well, that corporate America gets all the time. You know, instead of talking about a Green New Deal, let's talk about the billions and billions of dollars in subsidies that the fossil fuel industry gets every year in the United States and overseas. That's socialism, so to speak.
Absolutely.
It's government support. It's not free market. It's government intervention to help the well-heeled. That's what we should be talking about.
Yeah, there's got to be a fundamental shift in the way that we approach what government's job is, what our jobs are as people. There's got to be asses in the streets. We have to say this. We're done. We know that you're not going to do the things that are necessary for a sustainable planet, for a sustainable future for us, for our kids, for our grandkids. I'm sure that in your underground bunker, your grandchildren will be able to breathe fresh air, but not having that option, you know, it would be nice if we could just put the brakes on the we need to live in a bunker and move forward with let's kind of restore the planet and also maybe seize the means of production and, you know, put some other fuckers
Some
against
really
the wall.
radical ideas you have there.
I think most Americans want change, and I think that's why Trump won, and I think that's why Bernie was so popular in the primaries in 2016. I think people who voted for Trump and people who voted for Bernie have a lot more in common than we usually, discuss. I don't think it's that productive to. I'd say this. I wouldn't have said this 3 years ago. I don't think it's that productive to lead with Medicare for all, even though millions of people don't have medical and health insurance. I think if we had honest elections, we'd have a Congress that represents the American people.
Yeah.
I think even though Debbie Wasserman-Schultz outspent me 2-1 in the first race, I think we very well might have won if they counted the ballots properly. I think even with the money advantages, grassroots candidates can win if they count the ballots properly. To me, it's an abomination that we're one of the only so-called democracies. I don't think we're a democracy anymore.
Me either.
That still has these electronic voting machines. They've been banned all over Europe. They've been banned in Canada. And somehow we're supposed to have faith in this black box voting. It's like a fairy tale. Like you want to believe in Santa Claus. You want to believe that nobody would rig the machines. And we're left trusting those who are just not trustworthy. There's too much incentive. There's means, motive, and opportunity to rig the machines. And somehow we think that people aren't doing that. I don't. The system will not change until we have hand-marked paper ballots that are counted by hand in public.
You're goddamn right about that, man. I think that a lot of it is to go back to what you were talking about, that even though we're at near full employment, there's people that are working a lot of low-end jobs, multiple jobs. people that are just stressed and stretched, and if they turn to the news, if they try and pick up something that's going on, or if they hop on Facebook or Twitter, it's more than likely an article from a corporate media outlet. If it's got a viewpoint on either socialism or Venezuela or the upcoming election, it's written by someone who's a former intelligence community operator or director, or someone who works for or is on the board for like Rayathon, and the information that they're digesting is just bits and pieces of enough propaganda to make them choose a side. And as long as they have chosen a side, then they can research a little bit more about their side or about their enemy, you know. But that's where the energy is diverted. That's where the thought process is diverted, and when you come at them with new information, regardless of how factual it is, what they have chosen to dedicate their energy to is this complete fucking fabrication, but it is so real to them because they don't have time to see it any other way. They don't have money to take a fucking vacation, relax, and experience a different culture. They can't move. They can't afford to move. Let alone vacation.
Yeah, I agree with you. And look, you take a look at the last election, the last presidential election. Something like 62 million people voted for Trump and roughly 63 million for Hillary. 107 million people didn't bother voting. None of the above wins. And I must say, I'm trying to understand why I should vote.
Well,
if no one can assure me that the ballot I fill out that's passed through the scanning machine records the vote properly, should I take part in that kind of an election system? I don't know.
I make a point to say that election day is one day every 2 years, and that there's a lot of time in between that you can be an effective change agent without being involved in the governmental process. You know, I mean, there are worker strikes happening all over the planet right now. There are teacher strikes here in the U.S. where teachers are winning over and over again, and there's little to no coverage of that. But there's a proven track record that the only way that you get the people in power to move your way is to shut shit down and demand what is coming to you. And I think that we need to start talking about that, and point to Yellow Vest protests, point to the kids in Belgium that marched, 60,000 of them, against climate change, as a part of the Extinction Rebellion over the weekend.
A lot of that won't be reported in our mainstream media, and you know, when you try to post on it on social media, now that's one way to get shadow banned and throttled. And I saw this happen in our campaign over the last year or so. I felt that when I looked at what happened in 2016, that the election very well may have been stolen. I'll never really know. We'll never know. The ballots got thrown out. It's that easy to rig an election and get away with it. I thought the only thing I can do in the next election, in the 2018, was to try to just speak the truth. And I still think that's the most important thing that all of us can do, is to, like you said, try to find the time to research, to read both sides, all sides, but then to speak the truth in our own small circles, perhaps. You know, it's interesting to look at the collapse of the Soviet Union. They had Big Brother. You couldn't go on TV in the Soviet Union and espouse anti-Soviet views. Mm-hmm. And yet, most of the population was having conversations around dinner tables or out on walks on the streets where they knew they weren't being bugged. And those conversations were pretty much along the lines as, isn't this system complete bullshit? And so at some point it reached a tipping point and change came, and it came suddenly. And I think that's what's got to happen in this country, is that ordinary Americans have to just speak the truth to each other, that the system's bullshit, the electronic voting machines are bullshit, that a lot of this is a kabuki show, that the people in Washington who are saying they're really fighting for us really aren't. There ain't much difference between Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell on most of the issues. They managed to raise a few symbolic issues and, vilify each other over those symbolic issues. But then after work, they probably share drinks together. I think the more that folks can understand how rigged and the whole system is, the better. And the only way that's going to happen is if we talk truthfully to each other.
You are absolutely right. John Bolton sent Nancy Pelosi a personal thank you letter and tweeted it out to her for her position on supporting his illegal coup in Venezuela. And nobody said shit. That's the most progressive person Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez could support to run for Speaker of the House. That's how that goes. Fine. Okay. We just got a 5-minute from our producer, Barry. So, I guess we're going to fucking wind down a little bit, man. But is there anything that you would like to touch on real quick in the next 5 minutes?
Well, we mentioned the petition. Folks can go either to my website at timcanova.com. Our campaign website is still up. And if you just click on news, the petition will come right up. We've posted it on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter. It's a contract, candidates with a contract that started the petition. I'd urge folks to sign the petition. While I'm not optimistic that petitions are going to change things and get us the kind of hearing that we want, I do think that we should put this in front of the House and force them to rule one way or the other. So that's my last plea, really. I don't have any real closing remarks. I've enjoyed the conversation a lot. I appreciate what you're doing. I was also a supporter of the PIP, the Progressive Independent Party. I think we need to break out of the duopoly. We're never going to change things from within one of these two parties or from outside these two parties, as long as we've got these kinds of rigged elections, though.
We sure do appreciate all the work you've done for the people, Tim.
Absolutely, man. And I don't want anyone to get the impression that just because we minimalize the legitimacy of elections in the country that we don't appreciate the work that everybody does to run for office, to expose what is going on, to bring to light just how fucked this is. We had John Kiriakou on the other week, and I told him that I wished we treated whistleblowers like star athletes and athletes like athletes.
Absolutely, it's shameful the way Julian Assange has been thrown under the bus. When you think about all the things that he and WikiLeaks revealed about the war in Iraq and other wrongdoing around the world, even before the DNC stuff. I know it's become popular among Democrats to vilify this guy. They've forgotten everything else that Wiki has done. And WikiLeaks is not a partisan organization, but somehow they now want to link it to Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And I think it's a real disservice. I don't think there's evidence that bears out those kinds of accusations at all. And what you said about candidates running, I also have a lot of respect for those who are still fighting this fight. Just actually tomorrow morning, I'm going to meet with somebody, a young woman who wants to primary a Democrat next year. And, I'm not quite sure how that'll go. There's somebody who wants, my advice and support, I presume. And I don't have a lot of confidence that this person or anyone who's primarying an incumbent Democrat is going to win. I think Ocasio-Cortez was an anomaly, at best, an accident, so to speak. it hasn't happened much, and I don't think it's likely to happen. And yet people are still stepping up and wanting to fight those fights. I do think they should try to learn from the rigging that we've already seen, whether it's at the presidential level with the rigging against Bernie or 2 congressional races I've run. And I don't want to dissuade people from trying to fight these fights by running for office, but by the same token, we have to figure out ways to change the system outside the electoral process.
We should get Jared Beck and Cynthia McKinney, and we should all start the most cynical consulting firm on the planet.
That's fine.
All
Well,
right.
Thank
they've
you.
been down in the trenches themselves taking the hits. I've got a lot of respect for people like that who have been taking the hits.
Absolutely.
Hell yeah.
All right, Tim.
Thank you so much
man.
for your time tonight, Tim.
Thank you for all you're doing. Thanks for spreading the word.
Good
Hell
luck
yeah.
to us all.
Good luck to us all.